radioinfluence.com.
We'll break down and unpack the real catalyst, what's really driving the left's gun control, gun rights agenda with Second Amendment advocate Dan Was on this episode of United Patriots Uprising with Gary Binford. I'm your host, Gary Binford. Thanks for joining us. This podcast is available at radioinfluence.com or wherever you get your favorite podcasts. Hope you'll subscribe to it, leave a rating and a review, and be sure to tell your friends about the show. This interview was conducted with Dan shortly after I heard his presentation entitled Anti-Gun Propaganda, the first Friday in May at the Rock the Red convention in Greenville, South Carolina. Sadly, there have been several tragic mass shootings since then. Senseless killings have existed since Cain took the life of his brother Abel with the equivalent of a brick at the beginning of time. It's a part of life among fallen people. That's one thing. But issues such as gun grabs, universal background checks, red flag laws, gun violence, and ghost guns, all geared to bring about the Second Amendment's alteration and subsequent removal, are bait-and-switch maneuvers we can't afford to give in to. Why not? Let's get into it. He is a nationally recognized Second Amendment advocate, the author of Good Gun, Bad Guy series, and host of Good Gun, Bad Guy Radio and the Loaded Mic. You got to hear the Loaded Mic, people. You got to listen to both. You got to listen to both of them. He speaks at events such as the Rock the Red convention in Greenville, South Carolina, where I heard and met Dan earlier this month, and he's a contributing writer for numerous publications. He can be heard on numerous radio stations across the country, on shows including The Sean Hannity Show and NRA-TV. He's a rock-solid voice who exposes the strategies of the anti-gun crowd and explains their mission to disarm law-abiding American gun owners. Happy to bring to the show Dan Was. How you doing, Dan?
Well, thanks for that great introduction, Gary. I'm doing fine, thanks. How are you? I'm
doing fine, Dan, and meeting you and Sue and spending time with you guys down in Greenville was a pleasure because, you know, it's not just seeing the guests for me, it's also being able to correspond, bond, and get to speak off camera or in a situation where we can learn more and find out more about what people are about and why they do what they do and say what they say. So let's start right there. How did you get into, and why did you get into defending our Second Amendment?
Well, okay, this is an interesting story, and I tell the story in detail in my book, Good Gun, Bad Guy, but it really it was accidental. The whole thing was accidental, and the way it started was one night. Sue and I, my wife, were coming out of a late night movie theater in Albany, New York, at Crossgates Mall. And we had a run-in with this guy, and, you know, luckily everything ended fine. We were safe and nobody got hurt, but it was just enough to make me think about my responsibility to be able to defend my wife, my son, and myself. And it changed the way I thought about guns that night.
I assume he was packing. He was carrying a piece.
Well, I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, I have no idea. It could have been a bad situation, and like I said, I give all the details in the book. But you know, the thing is, I didn't know if he had a gun, or I didn't know if he had friends around the corner. I didn't know what could happen. There was all sorts of possibilities that went through my head. But at the time, I was kind of on the anti-gun side of the conversation, believe it or not, even though I had been raised in a pro-gun family. So my father took me hunting and target shooting and stuff, but I had gone kind of lefty in my 20s and into my 30s because I was kind of, like I like to say, I was hanging with the wrong crowd. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't bank robbers or drug dealers. It was anti-gun liberals. And what happened is that stuff kind of got in my head, and I started to, you know, go that way. And it was really kind of a strange thing because that night coming out of the movie theater, everything changed. All I needed was a little bit of an awareness and a little bit of a moment to kind of push me back into a sense of reality and understand, hey, maybe it's a good idea to be able to carry a gun to protect myself, my family, and the good people around me. So my whole mindset changed in that night, and it was really one of those things where it all happened at once. So anyway, after that night, I wrote an article called "The Fear of Guns," and it got picked up by some websites, and I was shocked. I was like, wow, this is pretty interesting. You know, I've never written anything before in my life, and all of a sudden these websites are picking up this story. So that was kind of cool. I was thinking to myself, well, I'm not really a writer, and I'm not a gun owner, but everything changed that night, and I became a gun owner. And not only that, I became a Second Amendment advocate because I started to see how badly the political left tries to demonize gun rights and gun owners. And the more I got into the conversation, the more I researched. And by the way, that article, you can still find that article, The Fear of Guns. And it turned into the first chapter of my first book, Good Gun, Bad Guy. And then from that point on, Good Gun, Bad Guy kind of wrote itself, because as I was writing the book, I was researching and I was coming up with more and more stuff. And I was amazed at just how influential and deceitful the political left is when it comes to the topic of guns. And I started to recognize all their strategies, and I started to dissect the strategies, and I started to look at their propaganda and their rhetoric, and it just started to unfold, and it got bigger and bigger. I realized that I was onto something that nobody else was really talking about, and that was uncovering the anti-gun lies and exposing them to the rest of the country, and letting people know just how bad they are. They're lying about the gun conversation, and just how easily it is for them to convince some people to think differently about guns. So that the first book kind of wrote itself. The second book came along where I started talking about the way the media gets involved in the whole thing, in the anti-gun propaganda. And then the third book started, and that was the third book, Good Gun, Bad Guy 3, is mostly about the politics behind the gun grab, why they want an unarmed population. So I got to tell you, I went from being kind of on the anti-gun side of the conversation to recognizing how important it is to be a conservative and how important it is to support our Second Amendment. My world completely changed.
I hear you. And what is so important about this, Dan, is you came from one side to another. So when people say, he's just a conservative, what does he know? See, you've lived it, you know it. And that's the thing we even talk about when we talk about people that think that communism is a Che Guevara t-shirt and free stuff. Go live in Venezuela for a week and you'll find out what it's about. So since you talked about the things that they do to try and push this agenda, let's give the people one example. And we're going to unpack a lot of stuff here, folks. But let's give them one example about how they work this gun grab thing. So the gun grab now is based on gun violence. Please tell people why gun violence has become the be-all and the end-all talking point to the gun grab.
Okay, well, it's a bit complicated, but let's start with the term gun violence. It's a term that really has no basis in reality. In other words, there's no such thing as gun violence. There's no such thing as, there just isn't any, it doesn't exist. Gun violence doesn't actually exist. What we're talking about is human violence.
Right.
But what they like to do is they like to associate violence with guns. And if you take the simple route and look at the Webster's Dictionary definition, you'll see, you have to, it's interesting now looking at Webster's Dictionary, you have to go back. I have a Webster's Dictionary from the 30s where you can get actual accurate definitions, because if you go to Google something and you look for the definition now, they're changing definition.
Mm-hmm.
It's really spooky, actually. But anyway, so if you look at, everybody knows what a gun is. So it can be a rifle, it can be a shotgun, it can be a handgun, whatever. Everyone's got an image of gun in their mind. When you say the word gun, you envision something, and you just did in your mind. As soon as I said the word gun, you envisioned it. It's a reactive thing. We already know what gun is. The problem is we also know what violence is. And when you look at the definition of violence, violence is a behavior. And that's the actual definition. It's a behavior. And when you look at the definition for the word behavior, you learn that a behavior can only be acted out by a human or an animal. So violence really has to have some sort of life force behind it, some sort of free will, or a sense of a causality behind it. So like a person can be violent. And a gun can't be violent, but the way they take the term gun and put it along with the word violence, you create this scenario in your mind of a gun actually committing the act of violence, or a gun behaving in a certain way. And the idea behind the term gun violence is to take the human element out of it, because with the right terminology and the right propaganda, words can make us envision things that don't actually exist. So you can actually, with the term gun violence, you can actually convince people that it's the gun that's being violent, or it's the gun that's behaving in a certain way. And we even have movies that will enforce this type of thing. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't know if you saw
I saw one on your website. Yeah,
True Lies was a movie with, what's her name from Halloween? Jamie Lee Curtis.
Mm-hmm.
And she was in it. And in the movie, you see, I think it was like an M10 or something. It was
coming down the stairs, firing on its own.
It was a fully automatic handgun. Well, handgun, yeah. And it was bouncing down the stairs. And every time it bounced down the stairs, it would spray rounds of bullets, and the bullets would kill bad guys. So this gun, in the way they filmed the movie, was bouncing down the stairs, kind of acting on its own, behaviorally, almost behaving in a certain way all by itself. And you can do that in movies, but the reality is it doesn't happen in real life. But when you take the term gun violence and you push it out there into the public forum, and you accompany it with things like this, with the movies, and you accompany it with scary photos and all sorts of other propaganda, you can actually get people to believe that guns can act or behave on their own in a violent manner, or that guns can cause people to behave in a certain way. So these are all psychological tricks and strategies that the anti-gun crowd uses to convince people to fear guns and hate gun owners, because, of course, gun owners support Second Amendment rights. So it's all part of the game. That's just one thing. So that's just gun violence. In the book, I talk about a lot more of this stuff, and I break it down so people can really understand what's going on, what does the propaganda mean, and what is the intent behind it.
Right. And something that you had in one of your on one of your loaded mics, people need to understand this. Just think about this from a guy that most people consider to be a very bright man. Albert Einstein said, nothing happens until something moves.
That's right.
Right? Break that down. Explain to people that don't get it. If you put a gun and just lay it there and you have it loaded, it will stay there the rest of eternity unless somebody picks it up and does something with it. Now, the media knows this, Dan, and here's people, if you don't get it, here's what should explain it to you. If a black guy shoots somebody, you don't hear a peep from the mainstream media. But let a white guy shoot somebody and all heck breaks loose. They want to take our guns away, this, that, and the other thing. If gangbangers and their minorities are killing people or shooting people or robbing people, you don't hear a word. But just let one white guy, not a million, not a zillion, just one, go in and shoot somebody. Now they got to take our guns away. That should prove the disingenuousness of it, right?
And you know what that comes down to? It really comes down to Democrats using black people for votes. And I've seen this now for a good decade in real full force, where they're starting to demonize white people and make white people look bad, calling us white supremacists and all the other nonsense. And then, covering up, acts of violence when black people commit it, because they know that they don't want to demonize black people, because the Democrats, that is, they need that the black vote, as they say. It's probably the most despicable thing that anybody can do to any race. And I recognize it. I see it, and I know I have a lot of black friends who also recognize it, and they don't like it, because when people are used like that, and they'll do it with white people, they'll do it with gay people, and any group of people, they'll find a way to use them and section them off from society and tell them that all these other people are they should hate them. They should, all these other people are trying to abuse them and trying to, treat them badly. So come with us, the Democrats, and vote for us, and we'll take care of you. It's that sort of thing. So that's why you're getting all this stuff with whenever there's a gun-related issue, or even just a murder in general. If it's a black perpetrator, you probably won't hear about it because it won't fit their narrative. If it's a white guy, they're going to be all over it.
Now let's take it a step further and show you how evil this is. The most major cities are run by Democrats. So because it does, just like you said, because it doesn't fit their narrative, and it's a proven fact that most crime committed by blacks are committed on blacks. So it's black on black crime. They can't afford to stop it because they don't even want you to know it exists, because then they'd have to deal with the guns that the gangbangers have. And they don't want to let you know that because they want to take it away from law-abiding citizens. So the people they claim that they love and want to take care of, they're watching them killing each other in their neighborhoods. They're watching little old ladies coming back from church getting hit in the back of the head and robbed, and they'll do nothing about it because they don't want to let you know about that level of gun violence. And that's the biggest level in the country, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah. If you look at any of the Democrat-run inner cities, and that's where you're going to get the most crime. And they're typically the most gun-restricted areas too, because the good people can't defend themselves. But, and you're right. They don't want you to know about that for political purposes, but for political racial purposes. But they also don't want you to know, and they don't want to stop it either, Gary. And this is the sad part that I've realized, is they don't want that the deaths related to guns to go down. Although they say they want to stop gun-related deaths. They call it gun violence. Mm-hmm. It's hard for me to even use the term, but they say they want to stop gun-related crimes, but they do not. Everything they do does the exact opposite. What it does is it increases gun-related crimes. And the reason they do that, I believe, is because they don't actually want the number to go down, the gun-related crimes, because if that number started to go down, like right now we're somewhere 36,000 or so gun-related deaths per year. That includes suicides, by the way. So we usually take that out of the equation. But just for the sake of numbers, you can use 36,000. If that number were to start going down,
out of business,
and gun ownership is going up like it has been, that doesn't look good for them, because if gun ownership is going up and gun-related deaths are going down, which is actually what happens. But they don't want that to happen. They want the gun-related deaths to stay high and increase, because that way they can push for more gun laws. But if people actually see that gun purchases are skyrocketing, which they are, and gun-related deaths are actually going down, which they are, they don't like that. It doesn't work for them.
Right. It's the same thing when you look at poverty and look at, since they want you to be not benevolent to God, but benevolent to daddy, the government, they need to keep you down. So they really don't want you rising up into the middle class where you want to keep your money. They need to keep you down there. So while they're saying, we love you and we're going to take care of you, yeah, they want to take care of you by keeping you on the government dime. But the only way they can do that is if you can't rise above a level where you don't need the government anymore and you can exist on your own. So they don't want you to do that. This is totally evil on both sides. Hey, Dan, since we're talking about an amendment, and since you brought up Webster's dictionary and how you can look and see how things are changing, they've kind of twisted and skewed, just like they've done all kinds of things from the founding fathers. Please explain what the Second Amendment is, why it is in there, which we know, and why it's so important that it remains.
The Second Amendment was written to protect gun ownership of private citizens should they become victims of a tyrannical government.
Right. Not about individual people or playing Gunsmoke in the streets. It's right. About what they just left.
Exactly. They wrote that for a very specific, and the left absolutely hates the idea that they wrote that. And that's the one thing, if anything makes me smile and laugh over this whole thing, it's the sheer hatred and the sheer anger that lives inside these liberal progressives in their own hearts and their own minds, and it's because they can't get through that Second Amendment wall. It was written very clearly, and thank God for that, because it's been hard for them to debunk. They try every way they possibly can, but the truth is, the Second Amendment was written. It says the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. It also talks about the militia and how a well-regulated militia is necessary to the freedom of the country, necessary for a free state. And that meant that the people needed to have guns, number one, to form militias, number two, to fight against a tyrannical government, number three. It's very simple. And if you read it, you'll see that. And I'm sure everybody has, but the political left try to make people believe it means something else.
Okay, here's the big question, Dan. I've been blessed over the 3 years that I've done this to have about 150 guests on total. And I've asked this question because it still boggles my mind in America. We have seen how in nations that have fallen, the first things the likes of Lenin, Stalin, Mao, Hugo Chavez, whoever did was take away the guns. Because if you have guns, you can fight back, as you said, against a tyrannical government. Why would even the people on the left, actually want private citizens not to have guns? Because they've seen what's happened in every other nation. Are they and they saw what Stalin, they saw what Mao did to their followers, to the useful idiots. You don't get to rule, you get shot. So what is it about these people that they can't look at world history and understand? If you allow them to take the guns away, Hitler, I don't care who it is, we're finished.
Well, you want to know the answer. I've thought about this a lot. Why would they want to do something like that? And I believe it's because they're scared of freedom. And when you look at freedom in any aspect of life, whether it's just freedom to get in your car and go on a vacation, whatever it is, there's a lot of responsibility that comes with freedom.
Mm-hmm.
And every action that we take as a free person, an act of free will, every action that we take as our own decision comes with equal reactions. And we're responsible for the reaction of the actions we take. Now, we understand, most people, logical thinking people understand, if I'm going to do this, there's going to be an effect to that action. There's going to be a reaction that I'm going to be responsible for. I'm willing to take the risk, and I'm willing to be responsible for my actions. That's what normal people say. Sometimes I screw up, and when I do, I'll take responsibility for that. But when I succeed because of actions that I've taken in the world, I expect to reap those rewards. And that's the benefit. There's, like I said, there's a downside of personal responsibility of it. But what happens, I think, with people on the left is people who are scared of that personal responsibility don't want to take responsibility. They're the ones who gravitate toward the left. It's not necessarily the left conditioning, although they do condition. It's not necessarily them conditioning people once they get there. It's the gravitation of people who would rather have somebody else take responsibility for their own life, who gravitate toward the political left, because what does the political left offer? It offers a solution to every problem. It offers to take the responsibility away from the person, away from the citizen, whether we're talking about welfare, whether we're talking about safety in public, whoever, or whatever the situation may be. People of that mentality tend to gravitate toward that ideology. And so the people who support communism really just want the government to take care of everything for them, because they know that if they choose their own path, they may fail. They may die. They may go broke. And this is why I believe there are people who actually support communism, because it seems to them kind of a fail-safe for their own failures.
Dan, I have to stop you for 1 second.
Okay.
Earth to those who think that way. Earth to those who think that way. Guess what? It's never worked.
Never worked.
So why would they continue to try?
Yeah, I know. It seems like a deranged way of living life, supporting something like that. But yeah, that's what I think. I think it's they want somebody else to take care of them. They don't want to be responsible for their own actions.
I hear you. Wow. Well, two things that America have heard from Democrats, and they keep pushing these things. Please explain these two things to people: red flag laws and universal background checks, and then tell them what the problem is with both of them. All
right. Well, how much time do we have?
Well, you're a public speaker and you do shows. You got time. You can, just don't put them to sleep. But how long does it take?
On some shows, I have to do this stuff in bullet points. So I like having the opportunity here where I can expand on this stuff. Okay, red flags and universal background. Let's start with red flags. So red flag laws developed out of a thing called swatting. Some people might know what swatting is. Swatting is was an act that people would do toward gun owners, and they would call the cops on someone if they saw them with a gun in public. And they had necessarily no reason. Maybe they were scared of the gun or whatever. They started to use swatting as a way to punish gun owners, and the cops would show up and question the gun owner, and the gun owner would most often be like, "What the hell are you doing? I'm just exercising my right. I'm not bothering anyone." But swatting eventually, and people got killed because of swatting too. There was actual deaths because cops would come up on people, and maybe a conflict would happen, and one guy got killed because while he was cleaning his own guns after he got accused of being a danger or a risk to society during a swatting situation. So swatting evolved into actual legislation, which is called extreme risk protection orders. And some states have adopted this. So swatting turns into extreme risk protection order, otherwise known as red flag law. So now there's legislation that says you can accuse someone of being a risk to themselves or society. Most often, in most states, you can do this anonymously, and the judge can order the police to take the guns, and then the gun owner has to go to court to redeem themselves and regain their good name. So you have to fight for your rights back, and you have to fight for your good name. That's what red flag laws are. It's a horrible thing, but it's a vehicle to confiscate vehicle used to confiscate guns without due process, and that's the important piece. In other words, you don't go to court and figure it out first. They take the guns first, and then you go to court and figure it out. So that's red flag laws. Now, universal background checks are basically turn into a gun registry, because they want universal background checks, which is really just a registration of all serial numbers of every gun. And the way they get that registration list is by doing background checks for every single firearm transaction that happens. In other words, if I wanted to give you a gun, or wanted to give even a stepson, like a non-blood related, they're talking about having that as a problem. I wouldn't be able to give my stepson, or if I had a stepson, or somebody like that. So you wouldn't be able to exchange guns without it going through an FFL, without the serial number being registered. So what does that do? Well, it basically creates a registry. And I never thought that the Second Amendment allowed for government to know who owns guns and where they're located. In fact, it was the exact opposite. When our founding fathers, they basically said it's none of the government's damn business who has guns and where they're located. But somehow we've gone down this path where all of a sudden everybody thinks that you should have your guns registered. And this is more conditioning and more propaganda from the left that teaches people this nonsense. But anyway, so you have universal background checks, which are basically a registry of gun owners and where the guns are located, but they run it in tandem, and they're trying to push that along with red flag laws, because in order to confiscate the guns with red flag laws, you first need to know where they are.
Right.
And that's why you'll see red flag laws being pushed almost in tandem with universal background checks.
Yeah, see, and you know what's interesting about this, people think about one thing. The universal background checks will do nothing to get guns off the street from criminals, gang members, and people who use guns for bad intentions, because they're not going to get legal guns. They're not going to go through the registry and go through the process to get a legal gun. They're getting guns on the black market or whatever, the street, wherever they get them. Those guns aren't going to be registered. So who is it going to hurt again? Us. Speaking about hurting, Dan, I remember when I was a kid, and most kids are afraid of ghosts, unless it's Casper, and of course, the friendly ghost. But most kids are afraid of ghosts, and it's kind of like you don't really realize when you're 4 or 5 that ghosts don't exist. But the Democrats have come up with something that you've been banging your gavel on, and they've come up with this ghost guns thing. Please tell us. What are ghost guns, and why are they trying to use this to scare the heck out of us?
Well, it's a perfect way to. I'm glad you brought that up right after we talked about universal background checks, because the term ghost guns is really like you said, to scare people. People are scared of ghosts. That's why we watch horror movies. It's part of our nature. Ghosts kind of scare us. So anybody who doesn't know any better with respect to guns, if you attach that term ghost to guns, again, we're taking terminologies and we're putting them together, and we're creating visuals inside people's heads. The term ghost gun is really designed to scare people. But the interesting thing is that they always have, if you notice with the left, they always create a problem, but they have a solution. They always have a solution to the problem. And their solution is universal background check. So the solution to solve the ghost gun problem, because they want you to think that all these unregistered guns are all over the place and everybody's getting their hands on them and they can't track them and they can't trace them, and they need to be able to track and trace them to keep everybody safe. But these ghost guns are so dangerous. And like I said before, they shouldn't be traced in the first place. It's nobody's business. But people who support this type of legislation will vote for the person who promises them safety, and that's always the Democrat. So ghost guns is a term basically to get support for universal background checks, because that's always their solution. We got this big problem that we created, right, called ghost guns. You should be very scared about it. But we have a solution, and that solution is universal background checks. So all you have to do is support universal background checks, and we will keep you safe. In the meantime, universal background checks create that gun registry we talked about earlier and put gun owners at risk.
Yeah, I hear you, Dan. You know, Dan, why have they been so successful as pushing this agenda when everyone must know that more good has come out of people having guns than the slight and you know, when something does go bad, it's a tragedy. But most people that just have guns, peaceful, abiding citizens, more good has come out of things that didn't happen because of people having guns than that don't. It's kind of like having the beware of dogs sign. People don't know if they step on your property whether you have a dog or not. They know you have a sign and they know, well, I can take this gamble if I want. Why is it they've been so successful with this, and why are they doing this in the first place?
Well, they're very successful with it because they convince people that where there's more guns, there's going to be more crime, which is nonsense. The actual opposite is true. As a matter of fact, there are studies that will show you anywhere from 1.5 to 2.5 million times per year in America, guns are used to save lives. They're called, we call it DGUs. We call it it's defensive gun use. And the interesting thing is that 90 to 95% of the time, the gun is not even used. It's just the mere presence of a gun that deters the bad guy. So we're talking about 2.5 million defensive gun uses per year in America. And that's 2.5 million potential lives saved. And then we can go over the other side and we can talk about the number of deaths that are where guns are used. And we're talking about 14,400 after we take out suicides. And we have to take out suicides, by the way, because we can't attribute guns to suicides, because we've learned by watching Australia that in the absence of guns, suicide doesn't go down. So they like to use suicide as part of their whole so-called gun violence narrative, but we take it out because it doesn't belong there. In other words, if people want to kill themselves, they're going to find a way, whether the gun's there or not. So we end up with about 14,400 gun-related deaths per year in America, and we have a potential for 2.5 million lives saved because of defensive gun uses. So all you have to do is look at those two numbers, and to me, that's a net positive for gun ownership.
Right, I hear you, and it's a huge net positive. But of course, they just play up every time somebody pops somebody. So here's the big question: how much in the dark do you think society is in this regard?
Well, I think they are pretty in the dark. I just talked to a guy from down south. I'm in New York, but I talked to this guy yesterday from down south, and he was very supportive of gun rights. You know, he believes that we should have our right to own guns, and he believes in the Second Amendment. But he didn't really understand anything about what's actually going on in the political sphere. And I started telling him some of the things that, you know, he just kind of knew, yeah, they're coming to get our guns or trying to get our guns. And I said, yeah. And I said, then there's a lot of things we can do, and there's a lot of very important specifics about what they're doing, the laws they're passing, and what they're trying to get through that you should know about. He didn't know any of this stuff, and that seems to be pretty common with a lot of the people I talk to. Now, I run mostly in pro-gun circles, so the vast majority of the people that I run with and hang out with and spend time with, they're pretty up on this stuff. But the average person that I talk to doesn't really know a whole lot of what's going on. They just think that, well, they're coming to take our guns and there's not a heck of a lot we can do about it. Well, there's a lot we can do about it, and there's a lot we are doing about it. But people need to get educated on the topic, and they need to get more into the details of what the Democrats are trying to do with respect to gun rights, so they can get a good visual on what's going on. And I think the average person really doesn't know the details and the important stuff behind the scenes. So yeah, I hope that answered your question.
It did, but it raises the other bigger question is, okay, how do we find out? Because they control the media, they control all kind of, the political spectrum, all kind of outlets for people like you, and shows like this are now limited, almost forced onto the internet, because you're not going to hear anything in the mainstream media. So how are people who are trying to earn a living or make, run their lives or raise their kids, how are they going to learn about this stuff? Because if they don't even know there's something they need to learn about, how do we get, and this is what you do, but how does the average Joe citizen educate himself and then help educate his neighbor?
Well, I know of this guy who wrote a book series called Good Gun, Bad Guy. And I suggest they buy that to start, and that will open it. It's actually, and thanks for asking, it's goodgunbadguy.com is the website, Gary.
We're going to get to that. Okay, go ahead.
I know you will. But
no,
Dan,
people that don't know you, that have never heard of you, or anybody, or John Lotter, whoever people are that support Second Amendment, if they don't know there's a problem and they don't know the people that are going to provide the solution, it's just like, like Trevor Loudon, John Guandolo, Claire Lopez, all the people that talk about, the communist infiltration in the Muslim Brotherhood in the country. If you don't even realize it's going on, you don't know there's something you're supposed to even check out to figure out what's wrong.
Well, that's what we're doing here today. We're
right.
hopefully sparking that interest in some people who are listening. Mm-hmm. And you're right. If they don't know, they just don't know. And there's no way to really, unless we can bring this topic more mainstream with our perspective, with an honest, truthful perspective on the Second Amendment and our rights. Unless we can do that, the left-wing media runs away with the narrative. So, but the good news is there are a lot of resources now that we didn't have before. I mean,
good.
You look at some of these new news networks, and they're speaking the truth, and we didn't have these networks before, so it's a good thing. So we're making it more difficult for the anti-American political left to get their message across. So it's getting better, but people, if they're interested in this topic, they really just need to seek out. Once you start going to places like Gun Owners of America, Ammo Land, you start looking at my books, Good Gun, Bad Guy stuff, you start looking at John Lott, once you start, you'll realize that there's a whole world out there that explains all this stuff in a truthful way. And it's pretty fascinating, but the left tries everything they can to prevent those messages from getting out.
Right. So tell the people where they can get your publications, tell them what they are, tell them about your show, and tell them about everything that you do that they can share with other people, so they don't have to tell them. If they don't know, they'll let you do it.
Sure. Well, I write for Ammo Land. And I've written for Daily Caller, Western Journal, Truth About Guns. I've written for a whole bunch of different publications, but I typically write regularly for Ammo Land News. And it's a great publication to get the truth, to get the facts and get the data. And it's fun too. There's a lot of entertaining stuff in there too. But so AmmoLand, they can find me, Dan Was, at AmmoLand. If you just search AmmoLand, search my name, I don't know, Google it up or something, you'll find me there. That's one way to get some of the information. My show, The Loaded Mic, is at loadedmic.com, and that's Mike, M-I-C, like microphone, loadedmic.com. And we have a web show that's just a lot of fun. It's a total blast.
Yeah, you'll like it, people.
We talk about primarily Second Amendment stuff, but we get into topics of the day and news of the day, politics of the day. And my co-host, John Chiara, our other co-host, Anthony Diso, my son, Danny Was Jr., produces the show. And we're on a couple networks now. So it's a lot of fun. We get a lot of laughs, and it's great. Loadedmic.com. I think you'll like it. And the other thing is my Good Gun, Bad Guy book series. Like I explained earlier, I wrote the book series because I thought it's probably the most important thing to be talking about right now, because without our Second Amendment rights, we got nothing. You know, the left will take over, and we'll be doing what they tell us. But they can't do that as long as we have our Constitution and Bill of Rights. It's important. So goodgunbadguy.com is where you can find the books, and you can start to learn about what they're doing and how we can either help them, because I believe some of them can be helped, or defeat them, which most of them will need to be defeated in this argument. And I think we can do it, and I think we're going to do it. It's goodgunbadguy.com.
Right, and he's got pictures of magnums on the books, which is cute. Yeah, I noticed that because books and you know, Dan has done the homework. Everyone, he's done the homework. Was on the other side, came over, saw the light, and has done the homework. So all you have to do is just get one person. You know, my motto is just get one, flip blue to red. All you have to do is just get one person who sees gun ownership one way and sees it from the left, and get them to understand what the founding fathers' intent was and how they're trying to take this away from us, not because they're moral, but because they're evil, and they have evil and bad intentions for this country. Along those lines, how does the Democratic Party, because everything they do is all interwoven and tied together, how do you tie the Democratic Party's fake racism into gun issues?
How do I tie?
Or do you?
Well,
do they go together in some devious way, shape, or form?
Well, I guess in modern day, if we're talking modern day right now, that's what I like to look at. I mean, because we can go back to, in history and talk about how gun restrictions were created and designed and targeted at Black people, so to prevent Black people from getting guns. But let's talk about modern day, because that's what we need to be focused on, I think. You know, and what I see is a lot of the inner cities, a lot of the primarily Black neighborhoods, west and south side of Chicago and Detroit, and, you know, areas where there's a lot of gun restrictions, and primarily or dominantly Black population is where you're seeing all the death and crime. And it seems to me like if Democrats wanted to empower Black people like they say they do, they wouldn't restrict their God-given right to defend themselves.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if the little old woman living in Detroit who's going out to get groceries and she gets mugged because she lives in a bad part of town, how does gun restriction help her when the bad guys pay no attention and she's disarmed? You know, it doesn't help, you know, Black people. If we want to correlate gun ownership with Black people, like you said, that's how I see it. To me, it looks like it hurts Black people, at least people who are living within the highly gun restricted areas, which are a lot of Democrat-run cities. So that's my take on it. Without giving it a whole lot of thought in the moment, that's kind of what I see, and I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, Dan. Well, and here's their faulty answer, and this is probably what you'd hear. Well, we would rather her be disarmed because at least she's alive. If she had a weapon, they'd probably put a bullet in her head. See, so they're saying, just let them mug you, old lady. Don't let them kill you.
Right.
It's crazy.
Well, what city? There was a city, and I don't know if it was Philadelphia or something. I think it might have been Philadelphia, where the car burglaries were getting so bad that people were just leaving their doors unlocked because they were tired of getting their windows smashed. So it's almost like the Democrats let the crime get so bad that the good people just kind of give up and don't fight back, and we create a victim predator society, and that's what I think they're trying to do.
Yeah, I hear you. Dan, I heard you speak down at Rock the Red in Greenville on the May 6th, and your topic was anti-gun propaganda. Please tell people what you spoke about and what all the enlightening information you gave us, why you chose that topic, and what it was about.
Well, I think I hit on a lot of that stuff. So the anti-gun propaganda talked about gun violence. It talked about the ghost gun narrative. It talked about things like weapons of war. We might remember Obama and Hillary using weapons of war all the time. That's to scare people. There's no such, it's not happening. There's not like this, you got tanks and all sorts of automatic firearms floating around in the cul-de-sac at the barbecue. It just doesn't happen. But weapons of war on the streets of your neighborhoods is what they would say, so people would be scared. I talked a lot about that stuff. The propaganda, Wild West, they'll use that term, Wild West. If more people have guns, there's going to be shootouts in the produce section, and you're going to have all this craziness going on. It doesn't actually happen, but they can create those scenarios with their propaganda. So I talked a lot about that. We talked about the difference between the defensive gun uses and gun-related deaths, and you saw the correlation there that I showed you. It's a vastly more number of lives saved because of guns than are taken. I also talked about the risk rate that we have in this country. So, for instance, if you take the number of people in this country, about 330 million, and you take the number of violent attacks that we have in this country, about 1.2 million per year in America, and you do the math, you realize that you have about a 1 in 275 chance of being the victim of a violent crime. Now, that might not sound so bad, but I don't like those odds. That means out of 275 people, one person is going to be attacked in a violent crime. I don't want to be that person. And then the anti-gun crowd will say, well, yeah, but I live in a nice suburban neighborhood. I don't have, my odds are a lot different. Well, yeah, your odds might be a lot better, but that means that, like we talked about that little old woman in Detroit, her odds got worse because the number of people in America didn't change and the number of violent attacks in America didn't change, but a lot of that violence gets shifted to those areas like the inner cities, where people are rendered unarmed and defenseless. So I talked a lot about that stuff too. Basically, that's the stuff that I covered at Rock the Red, which was a great event, by the way. I had a lot of fun.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and I really enjoyed listening to you. Why isn't there pushback when somebody when somebody in a school, like protecting a school, or somebody's protecting a store? Why isn't there pushback when the guy with the gun wins and saves lives or averts a catastrophe because that person on the premises or some private citizen had a gun and stopped a tragedy? Why is it every time somebody gets popped, it is just blared all across America, but all the times that the person who had a gun that they never had to use and may never have had to brandish, that is covered up?
Well, we get cases like that all the time, like Stephen Williford. You might know who Stephen Williford is. He was the one who went and grabbed his AR-15 and chased a guy after the school, after the church, right. The church shooting. So the truth is, this stuff happens all the time, every day, and but the problem is the mainstream media doesn't show it. Now, if we as conservatives had more media, and our media outlets weren't afraid to start speaking their mind, which I think they're starting to more, the narrative would change. It's all about the narrative, because the narrative influences the people, and the people go out and vote. And that's really what this is all about. But the left has been able to control the narrative because they control the majority of the media until now. Now, like I said, it's changing now. We're starting to create our own social media sites. We never thought we'd had to. We would have to, but we're doing it now. And we're lots of talk radio, lots of shows like yours and mine. All these conservative voices are starting to come out of the woodwork. And so everything is starting to change a little bit. You asked about pushback. Well, there is pushback, although I don't think we push a narrative on the right like they do on the left. We don't feel the need to boast and the need to push narratives for the sake of political purposes. They do, because their whole world revolves around their political ideology. Us, it's about living our lives as Americans and living in a free country and experiencing the American dream, raising our families, enjoying our lives. It seems to me that people on the right, conservatives, Republicans, don't necessarily feel the need to push a narrative quite like they do on the left. That's probably why you don't see quite as much pushback.
Yeah, I hear you. Well, we need to push back because they're trying to take this country away, and we can't let that happen. And along those lines, my final question, Dan, give the people a word of encouragement, because it's funny. You go down to Rock the Red and you hear everything that's wrong, but we haven't lost this battle, and we are moving in directions to win this war on several different fronts. How do you see this battle shaping up? And are you have some encouraging words you can leave the people with?
I think in the end we win. I think we win this in the end. I think it's going to be difficult here for a certain number of years. I don't know how long it's going to take, but I think in the end, good always overpowers evil. And we are the good guys, whether they believe it or not, and whether they try to change that narrative or not on us. We are the good guys. We're the ones who are pushing for family and God and rights and Constitution. We're the ones who support that stuff. So I think in the end we win, but it does take the will of the people to do it. And people are rising up now. We're seeing a lot of it now. We're seeing all the way down to our school board meetings where moms are going in infuriated. You know, these are people, if moms are going in and yelling at the school boards, this is new. This is different. Moms didn't typically do this stuff. But that should be encouraging to people listening, because now they are. And if they're doing it, you know, everybody else is, real Americans are getting pretty mad and pretty frustrated and more willing to stand up and speak out. So that's the encouragement right there, is that we're rising up and we will win.
Yeah, that's what we need to hear but we need to, it's not going to happen on its own, people. It's just like a gun can't hurt anybody if it's just laying down there on the floor or on the ground. We have to do this. See, the left, they've been moving and moving for 75 to 100 years, just moving inch by inch, inch by inch, inch by inch. They put us to the cliff. So now it's either we fight back or we go over the cliff. Dan, thank you very much for coming on. Before you go, please, one more time, tell people how they can reach you and anything you'd like to promote.
Sure. Thanks so much, Gary. I really appreciate it. It's been great talking to you, and let's
Same
do
here.
it again.
Yeah.
You're doing a great thing. Keep up the great work.
Thank you.
Really
I appreciate it. Yeah.
People can find me at loadedmike.com. That's loadedmike.com or goodgunbadguy.com.
There you go. And tell them the name of your books.
Yeah, Good Gun, Bad Guy.
Bad Guy, right. The series, and it's a series.
It's a 3-book series, yes.
And is there a 4th on its way?
Working on it. I just don't know how long it'll take. I've been busy with all sorts of stuff, so it might be a little bit, but there will be a 4th book.
Yeah, well, you keep on doing what you're doing because we need people out there getting the word out, because a lot of people don't understand why they're pushing this agenda and how they're pushing this agenda. And as everything that Marxists, communists, socialists, or anything on the left do, they use scare tactics. They want to make you think there's a catastrophe or there's this big thing that's getting ready to go down, and it's not true. It's never. They just try and scare us into giving away our rights, and we just can't allow it to happen. So, Dan, thank you for coming on. God bless you. God bless Sue, and God bless your family.
Thanks, my friend. Appreciate it.
You have it, everybody. Mr. Dan Was, and he told it at Rock the Red. He told it to you here. He gave you a lot of information. Please, people, learn it, understand it, and share it. Mr. Dan Was. I want to thank Dan Was for delving into why the Founding Fathers inserted the Second Amendment in our Constitution and why leftists are obsessed with its removal. If you didn't have clarity before on this subject, we hope this opens your eyes as wide as can be as to why we can't allow this to happen. Not in our America. This podcast is available for download at radioinfluence.com or wherever you get your favorite podcasts. Hope you'll subscribe to it, leave a rating and a review, and be sure to tell your friends about the show. That's all we've got time for now. Thanks for joining us. So until the next time, this is your host, Gary Binford, saying God bless you, God bless your families, and God bless America.